Sonic the Hedgehog is one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, and it is also one of the most popular video game franchises of all time. And so, naturally, popular things branch into a lot of other mediums, whether it would be movies, shows, comic books, really anything you could think of. So of course Sonic would manage to get into all of these mediums. And since the Sonic movies are pretty much the golden standard for video game movies, I wanted to go over my thoughts on them as a fan of the games. So I'm of course start off with the first movie, and it's kind of okay. Not bad by any means, but just kind of eh. What holds me back from liking it is because it feels like a really generic on-the-run movie with a random human and like some sort of anthropomorphic animal, like going on some sort of road trip. And I personally feel all the attempts at comedy are pretty mid, except for the parts when Jim Carrey's Eggman's on screen. I think he's kind of the best part of the movie. I do think that this movie does a good job with showing off how different Sonic feels, especially compared to the games, as he's pretty much an entirely different character. While he can be pretty annoying sometimes, I think he's a decently enjoyable version of the character, and he does keep some of the traits I'd expect from Sonic. But one thing the movie didn't do well is kind of making me care for some of its side characters, like, for example, the Donut Lord. I think he's kind of a poorly, like, not poorly written, but he's just kind of generic. I don't really think he has anything special to him, and I think his dynamic with Sonic is okay. Yeah, it can be pretty fun at points, especially during that one scene in the bar. I think you don't really get that sense of connection that you would get with maybe some other characters Sonic is friends with, like Knuckles or Tails, considering he's really just a normal dude interacting with just some random anthropomorphic animal, and he doesn't really have anything special to him. He's kind of just normal dude. I know I've repeated that a lot, but that's kind of just his entire character. And I also think Longclaw, like, listen, I understand she is kind of the entire reason why Sonic's on Earth. I don't know, I kind of forgot about her a lot of the time. She's easily the most forgettable part of the movie. So I don't really have anything against Longclaw as a character, but I think she's kind of forgettable, and I think they could have maybe like made you feel more of a connection towards Longclaw, though I'm not sure if that's me looking for more Sonic elements or if I'm just impatient about the movie. I think that's maybe just me, like, maybe just wanting to have a Sonic movie, so I'm not paying attention to the non-Sonic parts. But I don't know, like, I just didn't personally get that much of a connection with her. I'm sure maybe some other people don't. I don't really know, really. So I'm gonna give this movie a 6 out of 10 for that. It's a decent movie, but I don't think it's anything higher than that. Good start to the franchise. Now we go on to the second movie, and I personally think it's the start of the video game movie Glazers. I feel like the second you decide to say anything about a video game movie, an army of fans from those games will make it their mission to do some medieval torture methods on you or something. But I'll continue this section at the end of the video rather than just saying it now, because I think I should talk about the movie and not the community surrounding it. And the movie, I think, has a lot of problems. Now, a lot of the characters I think could have been handled a lot better, especially Tails. He kind of just explains his origin story to Sonic, and then he just kind of dances him in Russia, then kind of chills. Now, they do have a great dynamic, but I don't really think they actually built up a lot of parts where they make you realize how close Sonic is to Tails, because there's this one part in the movie where Tails gets hurt due to Sonic's actions, and then Sonic just kind of gets pissed. And when you're watching that, I didn't really feel like I was getting that much of a sense of Sonic caring, because while their chemistry was great, you know, they definitely felt like a really dynamic duo, I didn't really get that Sonic really cared for this character immediately right off the get-go. You know what I mean? Because their dynamic, I think, didn't have that much time to develop. And I think also a lot of that comes onto the part because I think a lot of that also is on the human scene where there's this whole wedding scene. I think it's extremely terrible because ultimately I think other characters could have been I think ultimately other characters could have been explored a lot more, like Knuckles, Eggman, the dynamic between Sonic and Tails, and you could have really gotten them to see how much more they could have grown as characters and stuff like that. But like, I really wish they did that because I think their relationship as friends wasn't explored enough, you know? I also think Knuckles himself was okay, you know? He's a decent threat. He's not a crazy villain. He's just kind of a villain, but he's not anything crazy. And I think Knuckles is decently enjoyable. Eggman, of course, is the highlight of this movie, and I definitely loved Eggman's moments just as much as I love him in the first movie. And considering it's Jim Carrey, I think it makes him feel, it's already going to be a 10 out of 10 out of 10. I think that the human characters, I'll get back to this point again, the human characters are absolutely terrible. They add almost nothing to the story. They serve zero purpose. They, a lot of the time, just take away screen time from the more important characters who I think could have gotten a lot more development. So, why even have these characters that nobody likes, nobody even cares for, and you have a whole scene that drags on regarding them? I just think it's a really stupid, they're just a really stupid addition to the movies overall. And I honestly don't really hate this movie. I just kind of think it's okay, but I think it's kind of slightly worse than the first. Well, not really slightly. I think it's a tier below the first, but generally, I just think it's just kind of a mid-movie overall. I don't think it's a horrible movie. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I just think it's alright, but I think the first is clearly superior. Now we get on to the third movie, and I think this is the best one. I think it's slightly better than the first, maybe a tier above the first. Now, I'll start off with the things that I did like about the movie before I focus on the parts that I didn't like about the movie. First of all, I loved Shadow. I thought he was a great version of the character, and I think, honestly, he's the second best version of Shadow we've ever seen on screen. I love how, just in character Shadow feels throughout the movie. He just feels exactly like he does feel in SA2, aka the GOAT Sonic game. So I definitely love Shadow's kind of whole, the way he just feels. I think his origin story is pretty decently well executed as well. I think Shadow kind of feels like the boogeyman throughout the entire movie. I know that's a really weird way to explain it, but I think he just kind of feels like this isolated character throughout the movie, where I think you don't really get to see what's going on through his mind. Well, you know what's going on through his mind, but you don't get to see it. So I think the movie is just kind of building up to that one conversation that he has with Shadow at the climax, where they just discuss their themselves as people and how we shouldn't let revenge consume us and stuff like that. And I think that's when the only point where you really that's the point where you get to see what's going on through Shadow's mind and not just know it, which kind of makes Shadow feel like this isolated figure and finally getting some actual spotlight. I'm going to talk about the stuff that I didn't like about the movie, and that was the Sonic and Eggman team-up thing. I think it was handled pretty poorly because I think it went by too fast, It went by so unbelievably fast to the point where you were like, oh yeah, they're teaming up, but then immediately, oh, I guess they're not teaming up. Wow. It's not really much of an actual kind of team-up. It's just kind of, well, it is a team-up, but it's just a really poorly handled one. I think what they could have done is kind of do something where, throughout the team-up, Eggman starts to feel a little bit more like he doesn't want to do villainy anymore, and he kind of just plays this facade that's really convincing towards Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and every single other character. Oh, actually, no, just Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. And to the point, and at the end, he ends up betraying them. And then the whole kind of sequence where they're breaking into Gun, and then the Bio-Lizard, the Space Colony arc happens. I think that would have been the perfect way to handle it, but no. The movie, I think, is ultimately too short for a Sonic and Eggman team-up thing like that. To the point where you don't really get to see much of an actual, evolution. They're just kind of teaming up for the sake of teaming up, and I think, ultimately, that plot point's handled pretty poorly. I think Sonic's whole thing where I feel like he sometimes goes maybe a little bit too alone, or sometimes he might let vengeance consume him. I think that was a great plot point. I think Knuckles and Tails are great supporting roles. I genuinely think that. So I genuinely loved how they could contrast Sonic. I think they also have a great dynamic, just like they did in the Sonic second movie. So yeah, not really much to say. It's just slightly better than the first. I did like it a lot, but ultimately I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I liked it more than the first, but it's just ultimately still doesn't really get out of that, meh kind of center, but I still did like this movie. Now, for the part you guys all probably want to hear me talk about, and that's the part regarding the video game community, and I think the video game movie community is extremely toxic. Now, The reason why I say this is because I feel like you cannot criticize a video game based on a movie without getting lynched. And it pisses me off because it's pretty much become an excuse for any bad movie just to be garbage, especially with people going, but plot doesn't matter, or it's what happens in the games. First of all, plot always matters because this is a storytelling medium. Second of all, just because it happens in the games doesn't mean it's good. Good, and ultimately, like, there are a lot of things that could be handled better in the game and just not handled better in the movie. Like, for example, the FNAF 2 movie, horrible movie. That's a terrible movie. I think automatically it's one of the worst video game movies, especially in recent years, and stuff like that. So I personally feel like, oh my god, this movie was just like peak because it has 2 million references, but like, come on, dude. I think ultimately it also sets a bad standard for like video game movies because I think these companies are now definitely starting to realize that they don't even have to put on much effort in terms of writing, and now they can just kind of produce as much slop as they can through just not even trying with their stories and just adding 2 million references, and apparently the communities will now be pleased. So ultimately, I think it just generally sets a bad precedent for video game movies, and I wish video game movies could be better, and I hope they end up being better because I thought the second Mario movie was just kind of mid. Generally, I just wish that we can get the best of both worlds with a movie that stays faithful and also has a good plot, which I think the Sonic movies do exceed in decently well, except for the second one. So, yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts on the Sonic movies and just video game movies as a whole. I'm gonna go now. I also had a lot of fun working on this video, despite the amount of times I've had to scrap this entire thing, then redo it, then scrap it again. So, yeah, that was great. Goodbye.
Well, then which button gets me a latte?
That would be the other one, sir.
What idiot designed this thing?
You did, sir.
Fair enough. Wilson, fire somebody.
Yes, sir,